Hi guys, thanks for coming on. This is another spotlight for our masterclass, and today's discussion will be rent vesting and rental culture. And of course, Amanda will be discussing this with me today. But first and foremost, housekeeping, Amanda.
All right, so just quickly before we begin, I'll keep it quick because I know a lot of you pop in and out of a lot of these masterclasses. So just to be clear, we don't replace your broker or your accountant. And for this particular class, we haven't taken an assessment of your individual circumstances. So the information in this class is general. You can apply it to your own situation, or you can obviously call Dragan to get more personalized information based on the content of this Spotlight Masterclass. So just take a look at our legal disclaimer so that you're clear there that obviously the information is not targeted to you as an individual. You are a member of a wider audience, and the wider audience is the target of this Spotlight Masterclass.
That's right.
So if we take a look where this particular topic fits into our Spotlight series, we're looking at topic 4. So rent vesting on one side, protecting the castle on the other side. So this is looking at what you already own before coming into your investment journey. So you may not own any properties yet, you might be renting yourself. Or if you look at protecting the castle, that's where you already own the home that you live in and you're looking to invest in addition to the home that you already live in. So it doesn't matter what you already own in terms of whether you can invest, but it might impact how you choose to invest. So today we're looking at rent vesting. So if you yourself are renting and looking to invest.
And yep, so of course, like before, feel free to book in a 15-minute discovery call with myself. You can use this QR code, not a PR code, sorry, QR code, or alternatively, you can just pretty much go to propertysessions.com.au/15 and book in a 15-minute discovery session with myself, and we'll have a discussion on what your needs and wants are from there on. Thank you. A little bit about myself now, for anyone who hasn't watched the other Spotlight masterclasses. I'll keep it brief. Most people know I'm not good at this. But anyway, so my background, my parents from former Yugoslavia, they came here in the 70s as immigrants. Grew up in commission housing, grew up as a kid that, obviously loved by my parents, but struggling to make ends meet while they were paying their mortgage. I was, one of those kids that pretty much did not have where all my friends around me did. And I guess it sort of had a spark in me to, in the future, to succeed and have a bit of a drive. Fast forward today, obviously having a property portfolio and I would say a successful business, family of 2 kids and a wife, as you can see in the photo there, teaching my kids to also take the correct footsteps as they're growing and pushing that mentality of investing into their little heads. Over to you, Amanda.
Nice. I suppose you could say that my parents did what Dragan is doing. They pushed it into my head from a very young age. So by the age of 21, I was ready to purchase my first property, thanks to their guidance. They didn't give us handouts, but they gave us knowledge and a nudge. So they always had us working from a very young age, more than one job. That work ethic probably came first, I think, before the push into property. The push into property was always in the background, but of course you need to reach a certain age before you can act on that. So they pushed work ethic first. It was always do well in school, get a job, work hard, effort above perfection. It was always have your day job, have a second job. So for example, I went into teaching. I became a secondary English teacher, but I always did, for example, tutoring on the side. There was always a second job. So you always saved your salary, lived off the income from your second job. It was always, how we were. I was very fortunate ethnic background. So I lived at home. The only way out was in a box or a wedding dress. So I was very fortunate there. I never had to worry about, paying rent. But, the trade-off was living with mum and dad, which was probably a fee of its own. No, it was fine. They were good. But it helped me. Yeah, so that mentality was always there in terms of, live at home so you can save and invest your money. Save your salary, live off your side hustle income, which for me was tutoring, and then I saved my teaching salary. So by having that there to save, I had a deposit very quickly. I had a second deposit very quickly. Then I got married and I joined forces with my husband, who was like-minded. We both came into the marriage with investment properties, and then we continued investing. So it's very much mentality and mindset, work ethic, and then, of course, joining forces with a like-minded partner. So my journey started nearly 20 years ago and has snowballed. Since then, I gave up teaching when I had my kids. You can see there I've got 3. And now I'm fully immersed in the property investment world.
Yes.
So
What is rent vesting, Amanda?
rent investing, and this is where the English teacher in me is going to come out. It's a portmanteau. Which basically means we're joining, 2 words together to create a new term. So rent vesting is when you are renting and investing at the same time. So you are renting where you live and you're investing outside of where you live. And there's a few reasons why people do this, particularly if they don't already own the home they live in, or they don't want to purchase a home to live in. It's not everybody's dream to buy the castle. And it's not always necessarily financially efficient to aim to buy the castle or to buy the castle first. So rent vesting is a way to sort of invest and get a foot in the door on that income generating property first. So rent vesting refers to a strategy where an individual rents a property to live in, often in a preferred location. So if you're wanting to live where you can't afford to buy, for example, and then renting out an investment property elsewhere, usually somewhere more affordable or in a high growth area. This allows you to build wealth through property investment without sacrificing the lifestyle location that you want to live in. So why do people rent vest? Why bother? If you're happy to rent, why bother investing at all? Or if you want to buy, why not buy where you want to live? So there's a few reasons that people choose to rent vest. These are some of the reasons that we've heard. Other reasons may apply to you. I have a deposit, but it isn't big enough to buy where I want to live. So if you want to live, nearer to the city or in a beachside area or, near where your parents are, wherever you may want to live, if that's not affordable to you, but you have a deposit, you might deploy that deposit into an area that's more affordable, because if the market moves, at least you're in the market and then your money goes up with the market. So the idea being is that savings sitting in a bank account don't grow with the market. They earn interest, but they don't grow at the same rate as the market. Whereas if you have your money in the property market and the property market flies, the value of your savings will also fly because it's in the market, with the market growing alongside it. So depending on the size of your deposit, if it's not big enough for where you want to live, but you still want to be in the market, rent vesting might work for you.
That's right.
Or I have a large enough deposit, but I can't service a loan of that size. So you might have the deposit, the 20%, but your income can't service a loan of the size that you're going to need. So that's where you might, again, deploy that deposit elsewhere. The next one, I like living with housemates and being close to work, but this is not the area I will ultimately end up living in long term. So people might rent vest because they know that where they're currently living is short term. They might be single, they might be living with housemates, they might be between jobs, their jobs might require travel. So buying the castle isn't practical because where they are isn't permanent. So rent vesting is a good way to purchase something with a long-term view, because investing is a long-term view, knowing that their current living circumstances are short-term. And then something about tax benefits. I love that one because people pick up the term rent vesting usually on forums or online, and it's usually tied to tax benefits, and they might not fully understand what the tax benefits are, but they know they exist. So we'll go into some of those advantages of rent vesting as well.
Okay, Amanda, what about those tax benefits?
Well, what are the tax benefits? What are the advantages to rent vesting?
Yep.
Are the tax benefits worth it? Because we've always banged on about this idea that you don't invest for tax benefits. The tax benefits should be the perk. That advice still applies here. Rent vesting tends to be done more for circumstance than for tax. Again, the tax is the icing on the cake. It's not the reason for doing it. So, are there advantages tax related to rent vesting? Yes, if those advantages apply to you and your goals and your lifestyle. So for example, number 1, tax deductible debt is better than non-tax deductible debt. So if you're tossing up between buying a castle or buying an investment property, the loan that you take out, the mortgage on your castle, your principal place of residence, is not tax deductible because it's not income producing. Tax deductions are only applicable to income producing assets like an investment property. So if you purchase an investment property, the mortgage or the loan on that, the interest repayments, so the cost of making money is the interest repayments, those are tax deductible. Not the principal repayments, only the interest repayments. This is a conversation for your accountant or your broker. This is an overview. So the interest repayments, if you're paying $40,000 a year in interest, that $40,000 is taken off your taxable income. If you earn $120,000 a year, you're paying $40,000 a year in interest, your taxable income drops to $80,000. Now, if you're then earning $25,000 in rent, that gets added back on. So 80 plus your 25 is $105,000. I got way more into the maths than I intended to. My point is, none of that applies if you're buying somewhere to live. If you buy somewhere to live, you live in it, you pay your mortgage off, and that's it. Okay? If you're buying an investment property and you want those tax deductions, yes, they do exist. You may be negatively geared, you may be positively geared. That's a question for your buyer's agent, what you want to achieve there. But yes, tax deductible debt, generally speaking, is better than non-tax deductible debt. Number 2, your expenses become tax deductible. So repairs and maintenance on that property also become tax deductible. But again, like we've said in other masterclasses, if you're spending money, the whole pie, to get back a slice of the pie, the tax deduction, you're still spending the money. So just be aware, if you are looking to rent vest, it's because you don't necessarily see where you're living as either long-term or affordable. Otherwise, I personally like the security of owning where I live because I don't like the idea of being able to be kicked out, evicted, whatever, at the mercy of housemates or, whatever. I don't love that. But then I'm married with kids. I need stability. As a single person, it could be different. As a retiree, it could be different. It depends on circumstances. So that's why I said rent vesting tends to be more a circumstance-driven event rather than a tax-driven event. But we do get asked a lot about the tax benefit. So here they are. Number 3, you can use the tax return to save for a second deposit. So sometimes people really like negative gearing or tax deductions because they then get that nice big refund on their tax return. And then they use that refund as a deposit or a partial deposit on their next purchase. So the reason people like that is because they call it forced savings. That's actually what my dad did, the approach my dad took with us kids. So the reason that my parents forced us kids to purchase property really young is what he called forced savings. He basically committed us to mortgages so that we had to meet those repayments. We had to save. We got back that refund at the end of the financial year, and it was forced savings. It stopped us from spending. So if you're somebody that is bad at saving, committing to something like this can force you to save, and then you get that refund back as a lump sum. And then you go, oh, there's $30,000 there on my tax return. Hey, I've got $30,000. That's a deposit. Or that's a holiday, depending how you look at it. But that's a deposit where to save manually that $30,000, that's $500 or $600 a week. Most people can't save that. It's a lot of money after tax to save $500 or $600 a week. But structuring it through an investment, either negatively geared or through your deductions, that $30,000 a year saving suddenly becomes achievable. You still spent money for that $30,000 to exist, but you've got equity growing in the market and you've got a lump sum return on your tax every year. Yep. Psychologically, you're probably net better off than if you were absent-mindedly spending that money week to week instead of saving it. So an advantage for rent vesting, again, circumstantial. If you're a bad saver, it can force savings through the tax benefits. It's not the reason that we invest, but circumstantially, if you're better off that way, it could work for you. Again, these are very nuanced reasons and rationales. It does require a call with Dragan to nut that out for you personally and whether it applies to you as a benefit. If you are a good saver, it might not serve as much of a purpose. But usually, particularly, when time runs away, forced saving can be a good thing. So as I said, my parents forced all us kids into property for that reason when we were young. It tied up our money, it tied up our commitment, it forced us to save. Yep. However, just know that if you buy an investment over a castle first, the investment will always be subject to capital gains tax. The house you live in isn't. So if you do see the house you live in as a short-term thing, it's not subject to tax. If you can commit to investing, The idea is that investing is long-term because it is subject to tax when you sell. But if you hold long-term, again, withdrawing equity is tax-free. So if you never sell, but you take the equity out, you can take that money out tax-free because it's not income, it's borrowings. But if you sell, and we do have another Spotlight Masterclass on capital gains tax specifically, if you sell, it is subject to capital gains tax. And I do recommend that you watch the video that we have on capital gains tax because that's a whole other beast that we're just touching on now.
Disadvantages of rent vesting, Amanda.
Yeah.
Please.
So I don't want to let my bias show because for me and my age and my stage of life, rent vesting doesn't appeal to me. But it does for certain people at certain stages of life. So if rent vesting is so great, why isn't it so popular? You will see my bias come through a little bit here, particularly with that first one, lack of security with renting. No matter how good a tenant you are at the mercy of your landlord. If they want to renovate, if they want to sell, you get that eviction notice. You have no choice over the timing of when you have to vacate that property. For me, as a married person with 3 children, I don't love that. I don't love the idea that I can be given notice and then I got to find somewhere else, think about schooling, etc. Now, if you look at the flip side of that, I've always said in our other webinars, the best tenant is a family with children because they are committed to their local school. They're not likely to move. The other way, that gives me anxiety. I don't want to be a renter for that reason because I'm at the mercy of a landlord. How do I know that my landlord is long-term minded? So just thinking about that, if that's something that you want to commit to, at the same time, you can use rent vesting as a stepping stone. You can invest and still buy a castle later. But if your long-term plan is to rent vest, just be aware that as your life changes or your circumstances change, your priorities might change. At some point, you might want the security of owning. So again, rent vesting is circumstantial. For me, I like the security of owning. Number 2, forfeiture of owner-occupier benefit. So if this is your first purchase and you're purchasing an investment property as your first purchase, you forfeit certain benefits like first home buyer grants. Because once you've purchased and rented that property first, you don't get the first home buyer grant. Now, a conversation to have with your accountant, there is what's called the 6-year rule. So if you purchase a property and you live in it for a few years first, or however long, is it 12 months a minimum?
12.
The 6 years?
It's about 12 months, I say.
This is an accountant. This is why I said we don't replace your accountant. We are not accountants. But for the 6-year rule, if you live in a property first and then go and rent somewhere, not own, rent, and then you come back to this property or sell it within 6 years, it's not subject to capital gains tax because it's still your primary residence and you've lived in it first. So if you did that, got your first home buyer's grant, went and then sold within 6 years, again, conversation for your accountant. You can avoid capital gains tax and still get your first home buyer grant. But it does, I think, require you to either sell the property or when you rent it, you get it revalued and then the capital gains tax applies to the value from when you begin renting it. Conversation for your accountant, bit of a loophole there if you know you're sort of within that sort of time frame and you're happy to live in it first. If you're happy to live in it first, that could work for you and then you don't forfeit your first home buyer grant. Third one, your funds are tied up if you want to buy an owner-occupier or your circumstances change. So say you're a young person in your 20s and you go, yep, rent vesting is for me. And then in 3 years' time, you meet someone that you want to marry and have children with and you've tied up your money in an investment when you want to buy a first home with your partner. Property investment is long-term. 3 years probably isn't enough time to justify the transaction costs of buying, selling, and capital gains tax. So it's difficult to justify the transaction costs if it ends up becoming an unexpected short-term play. So you've got to be really committed to the idea of not necessarily rent vesting, but knowing that you don't have to sell the investment if your circumstances change and you want to buy somewhere to live. If you're confident that you can manage both, that's fine. But if you're rent vesting because your future is unknown, just be aware that pivots and changes can be costly, particularly when it comes to transaction costs. And then number 4, the other disadvantage of rent vesting is ultimately that rent is dead money, even if you have your money growing elsewhere. You're still paying rent on something that has no tax benefit, the rent that you pay out. You can't claim a deduction back. You can't use that for anything. It's literally just, say your rent is $500 a week. That's $500 a week that you're hemorrhaging for no return. You're not getting the capital growth on the property that you're paying rent on. There's no tax deduction. There's no benefit. There's nothing to write off. You're just throwing away, that rent money each week. I know that there's a lot of articles that do the rounds on, is it cheaper to rent? Is it cheaper to buy? They leave out a lot of the maths and a lot of the tax benefits. They just sort of look at the weekly cost. Like, yeah, $500 a week is cheaper than $800 a week on a mortgage. Yes, but it doesn't factor in that when you sell that property that you've paid $800 a week on, you get all your money back because you own the underlying asset. Rent money, you never get that back. There's no way to recuperate or claw back that money because you've just paid it out to somebody else. So when you see those, is renting cheaper or buying cheaper, like week to week, yes, but long term, when you sell the property that you own, you get your money back. So just be really careful convincing yourself that renting long term is a good idea. At some point, you should want to buy what you live in. Or if you're happy to throw that money away, maybe you're a high income earner, maybe the negative gearing covers it, whatever. Just make sure your maths is solid. Again, that's where a quarter Dragan is really justified because he can nut out those numbers with you and work out the best way to deploy your money for long-term growth, not just week to week, keeping your head above water.
Yep.
Because you want to create a long-term strategy where you're not just keeping your head above water. There's no water, what's the alternative? You're on the sand.
Yeah.
You're sunbaking on the sand. Okay. So when is rentvesting a good idea? Because I seem to have been a bit negative Nancy on it. And like I said, I'm noting that I do have a biased opinion on this topic. If you're comfortable with it, that's fine. But when is it a good idea? Rentvesting is usually a temporary method to build up to greater things. And like I said, it's temporary if you can hold and still do whatever else you want to do. So when is it a good time to use this stepping stone? If you're young and your deposit isn't big enough to buy something to live in, or if you're not able to save at the rate the market is growing and you want to get your money into the market, like I said at the beginning, you want to grow, you want your ships to rise when all the ships rise, then rentvesting is fine. If your savings can't keep up with the market, just get in and buy something affordable. Then I support it. If you're not prepared to live where you can afford, so if you're accustomed to an inner city lifestyle or living in an affluent area because your parents raised you in one, that's fine too. I think being close to family or close to where you work is important. And if you can't afford that and rentvesting is a way to mitigate that, then I support rentvesting. If you're a higher income earner and can benefit from tax incentives like negative gearing, which I touched on earlier, then yes, there is a way to justify it strategically. But again, that's a conversation with Dragan, your broker and your accountant.
Mhm.
If you travel or move around a lot, so if purchasing a place to live isn't viable simply because you're not in one place for long enough to justify transaction costs, then rentvesting gives you the stability of your money in the market while you do your moving around and your traveling, then yes, rentvesting in that case is the best option. Or if you know that you're not likely to want to purchase a PPOR for 5 to 10 years, so principal place of residence. If you know you're a good 5 or 10 years away from wanting to buy something with a partner or somewhere more permanent, or you know that your travel will be done by then the reason I say 5 to 10 years is because the rentvest property, the investment, will have enough equity in it that you can redraw that equity and then that will be your deposit for something to live in. So it's a bit longer term. If we're talking 3 years, that equity might not be there, but 5 to 10 years, that investment property will have enough equity in it to fund your next purchase anyway, pending borrowing, check with your broker. But in that case, if we're going longer term, then the market kind of does the work for you and it becomes viable again. So for those reasons, I support rentvesting. So if you're 20 and you've got a limited deposit and you know you're a good 10 years away from marriage and babies, go for it. Get your money into the market. But if you're my age, couple of kids, and you're not, you haven't really locked down a place to live,
Or if you're 20, this is going away from this subject, live with your parents as long as possible. That's what I did.
if you get on you,
If you get onto them. So that's how I saved up my first deposit for investment properties. I lived with them until I think I was 23 years old. I started business a year before that, saved up some a decent deposit, and that's how I got started. You will get there quicker, obviously. It depends on if you can. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but back to this.
Yeah, feel like sometimes that can uneven the playing field, because for those of us that didn't have to worry about paying rent in our early 20s, it absolutely is a leg up.
Yep.
Compared to someone like my husband who did pay, well, he paid board. He lived at home, but he paid board, so we call it rent. It does make a difference, and I understand that that difference isn't available to everybody. And it is a handout in some ways, I suppose, or an advantage, because it's an expense that you don't have to absorb into your savings.
Yeah.
And that's why I sort of mentioned tax returns earlier. Like saving $500 to $600 a week is a lot of money to come out of your after-tax income compared to a tax return, which is like a pre-tax sort of income. So yeah, living with your parents is advice where if it is an option to you and you want to move out because you want to be young and have fun, or even travel, going on holidays, like there is merit to having fun and enjoying life and being independent, but that does come at a cost. And that cost is a 10-year delay, right? So instead of starting this journey at 20, you might start this journey at 30. And that 10 years ago, yeah, I'm enjoying my 20s, but 10 years is an entire property cycle. And we know what property does in 10 years, it doubles, right? So if you look at that power of compound, right? I started at 20 or 21, but we'll round to 20. So if you look at, say, me and my friends, I started at 20, and then I had friends that started at 30, and now I've got friends starting at 40. So if you look at that compounding, what I had at 20 was double at 30 compared to my friends starting, doubled again at 40 compared to my friends starting now. So the gap between you and your friends widens with every decade that passes. So the fun that you have in your 20s is fun, and I did it too, right? But it comes at a price later, and that price compounds every decade.
That's right.
So try and find a balance. So if you can live with your parent, and I traveled because I lived with my parents as well because I had fewer expenses. But if you're someone that has to meet those expenses and those commitments, if you are paying rent, then you might not get the travel, or you might not get the house. Like you can't have it all, right?
Yeah.
So you got to pick.
Sorry, man. And not only that, it's if you're going out and doing it, investing on your own, and even if you, and I'm talking from experience, and even if you do start in your early 20s, what you learn in those 10 years will be different from how you'll be investing in your early 30s to, to your 40s and 50s. And I speak from experience because I wish I was investing in my early 20s like I was in my 30s. So there's that educational gap,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. So even if you start in your 30s and you're still investing right into your 40s, you're going to wish you're investing in your 30s like you are in your 40s. Does that make sense?
Yeah. If you're not in a position to buy in your 20s, at least invest in education. Is
Yeah,
what you say?
Yeah. Yep.
So you can skip a decade of errors, like someone watch our big webinar for the decade of error, or not decade.
So a few, about at least 5 years of errors. So yeah.
So if you're going to not have your 20s available to you for investing, then use them for education so that when you do invest, you fast track by not making mistakes.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And it's all about fast tracking.
Yeah.
And again, guys, to know all about that, you've got your QR code right here, or go to propertysessions.com.au/15, book a call, 15-minute discovery call with myself. And obviously, and we can have that discussion and, understand your needs and wants and where to go from there. Thank you for your time. And Amanda, thank you. And we'll get into our next spotlight session. See you then.
There.